Hello and welcome. I'm Eric Miskell and welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. We're here today. We have some guests I'll introduce momentarily, but the theme today is the ECIA, who's the Electronic Components Industry Association, recently released a report on workplace disruption, things that have come about with member companies throughout the pandemic. Very interesting document, and so I've invited two guests today to share with us some of the insights that they derived from that. With us today are Don Elario, he's the Vice President of Industry Practices at the ECIA, and Russ Dzielak, who's the Director of Channel and Key Accounts at Phoenix Contact. So gentlemen, thank you both for the time today and willingness to come on and share some of the learnings from your report with our audience. As I always like to do, I'd like to allow you each to introduce yourselves, kind of in brief, yourself and your organization for the benefit of the audience so people know who you are. Russ, why don't we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. So Russ Dzielak, I'm the Director of the Electronic Channel and Key Accounts at Phoenix Contact, based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I've been with Phoenix Contact. We're a privately held German industrial electronics manufacturing company. I've been with Phoenix for about 15 years in total, and working with the ECIA organization for probably the better part of 8 or 9 years of that at this point in time. Having the pleasure to work with Don and a wonderful group of people over at the ECIA and GIPC organizations.
Very good, thank you. And Don, tell us about yourself.
Sure, thanks a lot, Eric. I've probably spent 40 years in the industry, most of that in distribution and some of it in manufacturing. But I've worked for ECIA now almost 5 years, but I've been affiliated with ECIA for probably 30 plus years in my tenure. And as you said earlier, I lead the Global Industry Practices Committee. And one of the things that we do, which is very important, is we work on global common problems in the industry. And we come together in a non-competitive, collaborative way with various companies to work on these issues together. And I think, Russ's point earlier on the workplace disruption, the challenges post-pandemic, I think is a great example of that. This work group has been together now for going on 3 years, and it was only supposed to be a one-year group, but it started in 2020. And as we all know, the issues associated with the pandemic have taken on a life of their own. So, and they continue to evolve, and the challenges continue to change. So, but that's one example. Just another quick example is, we also work with trending technologies, like AI, machine learning. And, one of the issues I think, which is near and dear to the entire industry, is PCNs, or product change notifications. And we're now exploring options with AI and machine learning to better that for the industry. So those are some of the things that we work on, and there's a whole variety of things. There's actually 7 areas of focus that we concentrate on, and we have various work groups during the course of the year.
Okay, so it sounds like the GIPC's role is to kind of keep a pulse of kind of the different changing dynamics within the industry, then within member companies.
There's always something going on. There's always a new issue. There's always something that rears its ugly head in the industry. We now have the ban that's coming in June with regards to Xinjiang, China. So, we have to take a look at things like that. We've got lots of environmental issues with, PIP 3.1 and the use of chemicals and different things. And these things come and they bring a lot of disruption in the industry. And we have to work together to best resolve that so the end customers see minimal impact, actually.
Yeah. Well, speaking of disruption, let's talk about this report that we're here to discuss, which is entitled Workplace Disruption, How It Is Changing. Tell us, maybe before we get into the learnings from this report, tell us kind of the what and how of this latest report. Who was involved? How did this come about? How did you go about this?
Sure, certainly. As I kind of mentioned early on in the pandemic, the GIPC, we always see ourselves as trying to find ways to provide value to the industry at large, right? And we had tackled some of the very early, most urgent, immediate needs during the pandemic, which was how do you keep your employees safe? How do you keep your workplaces safe, et cetera? And then, maybe it was a little naive, but pretty quickly on the heels of that, we thought we were going to be coming out of the pandemic, right? So we started thinking, what happens next? How do we begin coming out of the lockdown periods? And that's when this particular work group first was put together. It was really just to kind of share some best practices and ideas and anticipating getting in front of customers again, and just working with all your business colleagues, and how do we re-engage, because it was such a shock to the system. So we pulled together a small group at that point. I want to say there were about 5 member companies involved, and we really just started holding regular monthly meetings to kick around different topics to see, like, how's your organization approaching a customer visit? Do you require vaccines? Do you require masks? I guess vaccines weren't even a thing back then, but do you require masks? Do you require, social distancing and, kind of liability waivers and all these topics, and that seems like forever ago, because the topics have certainly changed, morphed. And over the past 2 years, I think the working group has been expanded, but the mission has pretty much stayed the same, is to determine how do we provide value to our member organizations and the industry at large, and not on approaching how do you re-engage with your customers, but all these ancillary topics around return to office and employee productivity, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think the work group that Russ talked about, it's up to 10 companies now, and it's represented really by folks from manufacturing, from distribution, from the manufacturing rep community. It's also representing different products, from semiconductors, down to electromechanical and passives. And we've got a variety of folks in their responsibilities at work, from HR representatives to sales to operations. And it brings a real broad perspective, I think, into Russ's work group.
Absolutely.
That's good. Now, as I read the report, there seemed to be 3 main issues that were considered within this report. There was the return to office issue, the attracting and retaining employees, and then the whole issue of employee productivity. And as I look at those, I think, the latter 2 are always challenges in business, right? But in the context of the global pandemic, they've become more acute. And I think, and then each in turn is impacted by that first one, this whole issue of return to office, right? I think that's been a big challenge. How do you do this? You mentioned liability waivers just for customer visits, but I'm sure legal departments are doing flips over these issues as they try to come to terms with it. So let's start there. Let's start with the whole issue of the return to office. If you would, Russ, talk about some of the distinctions that the report revealed in terms of this.
Yeah. So, this was really kind of one of the key topics very early on, right? How do we get back into the office? There's a lot of different approaches. And even today, I think one of the very first findings was there was really no one single dominant way to approach that return to office question, which is really unique. There's just a lot of different approaches to it. What we ended up doing throughout our discussions is kind of categorizing what we call 2 different approaches commonly, right? Loosely defined as, loosely a defined approach an organization could take, and then more of a flexible approach. So a defined approach is when an organization goes out to their employee base and says, hey, we're going to come back into the office. These are the people who come back. These are the people who don't. These are the times that you're going to be expected to be in the office, whether it's, 4 days a week, 3 days a week, or in certain circumstances, you'll give the employee a little bit of flexibility and say, hey, you need to be in the office 15 days a week, 5 days, or 15 days a month, 5 days a month. You have some flexibility to choose, but it's a very defined approach, and it's kind of, peanut butter spread across the organization. The flexible approaches, I think really what we found emphasize a lot more of a trusting culture within their organizations, trusting the employees to be able to work equally as well from both remote or in the office environment. And, that's kind of gives a lot more flexibility to individual departments or the employee itself to determine, hey, what works best for us, given that I can be equally productive either at home or in the office. How much time do I want to spend? How am I going to collaborate with my, coworkers or customers or what have you? So that flexible approach is more individual decisions.
Okay. And, part of, it was interesting, I thought that within there, you talked about kind of the eligibility for each of these, which is really determined by job function, right? So, and then there's also the issue of that's touched upon about employee personality and work styles has to be considered in this as well. Speak to that a bit, if you would.
Yeah, so I think we found, there's different viewpoints on how employees go about their jobs, right? Whether it's by different types of roles. Some roles certainly are much more, they need to be in the office environment to be performed, right? Some roles are a little bit more collaborative, where face-to-face collaboration works better than others. It's really, I think, more of a management style, right? How you view your employee base is going to work best. One of the things that our group has really stressed over this time period is the decision makers who are determining these back to work policies. They're really going to land on better decisions if they're more in tune with their employee base and what their expectations are, and truly how they feel they can perform their jobs. I mean, over and over, we've had these discussions about how communication, and even lots of times like employee surveys on kind of doing a test run on, return to office policies can really have a large impact, because it can be very negative, have negative effects in your organization if you release a return to work policy and then 90% of the employee base kind of rejects it or is unhappy with those decisions. So being really in tune with the true thoughts and feelings of the employee base is critical.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're seeing now, and we recently had a call with the work group last week, is a lot of companies, as Russ said, are rethinking this and revising their plans as they're going through the learning curve now, because this is new ground. People haven't done this before. So there's going to be a lot of things that work and a lot of things that don't work.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Russ, in there too, policies. And it strikes me that, and I think you touch on this, the policies are both organizational policies, but you also have to balance that with kind of governmental regulations in different regions of, where the companies are operating, right? And that's a challenge.
Yeah, by and large, I mean, that's one of the first responsibility to give you is, most organizations are spread out across the country and across the world. And, the first feeling is you always have to stay in line, of course, with local government regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, I mean, it goes to your original point. There is no one size fits all in this. You really need to stay in tune. And it's interesting what you said, Don, that recently people are seeing, even though we started down a certain path, now they're saying they need to adjust that with the realities of the workforce and the way people are reacting to it. So it's maintain that flexibility, obviously. So,
right.
Now, the other issue is, and I find this interesting, is the attracting and retaining employees side, because of course we're going through what has been termed the Great Resignation, right? This time, right? So attracting and retaining employees has become even more challenging. Explain some of the issues that your report revealed related to this phenomenon.
So as you can tell, I mean, so many of these topics are interrelated, right? I mean, this was kind of a natural kind of add-on topic for our return to office, because there's so many personal level decisions that are being made about whether I'm going to leave a company or stay with a company, or whether I'm nearing that retirement age. Do I want to take an early retirement, or if I just, had enough? That Great Resignation, maintaining your employee base is really interwoven with your return to office policies. Time and time again, we've heard that, this is a huge influence on the individual decision whether they want to keep their jobs or even look for just a different role within the same company. But at the end of the day, a lot of our discussions comes down to whether you're maintaining an employee or being able to attract the new ones. It's how how does your organization maintain their company culture, right? How do you maintain that employee engagement and feeling of connectedness, right? That seems to really be the common theme that most employees, if they feel like they're part of the decision process, that the work from home policies or return to office policies have their best interests in heart, that is a huge factor in influencing whether or not they want to stay in their job and stay with the company.
Yeah. Yeah, and you touched upon the issues too of job fatigue and even the changing priorities of workers who, during the worst of the pandemic, had their kids at home, and they had to make sure their kids are paying attention and doing this, right? So there's a lot of stress in the lives of the workers all of a sudden that just wasn't there before.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many, things that I think traditionally weren't necessarily a factor. Whether it's taking care of a loved one who may be sick, or taking care of your children, or your children having access to schools and daycares and things of that nature. The requirement for flexibility in balancing that job, work-life balance has really become much greater in today's work environment than it was, pre-pandemic.
Yeah. And to the point you've been making about the flexibility and adjusting to the new realities as they're evolving, that you have to stay in tune with that continually now too. It's not like it's over. Okay, we're done.
Yeah.
This is still we're still living through this process, and the challenges remain.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for the foreseeable future as well, these issues don't seem to be, diminishing in any way, shape, or form.
Now, the last kind of major issue was the issue of employee productivity, and especially in a work from home of an environment. And I thought you made some excellent points about this and how challenging monitoring the employee productivity can be in these work from home situations. Tell us about that a bit.
So employee productivity, if you look at the traditional measures, right, is our revenue growing relative to the number of employees that we have, right? That's probably the most traditional measure of employee productivity. And as we're coming out of the pandemic and we're in this booming marketplace, I think you can say that just about all industries out there these days, the economy is just on fire, right? Business is doing great. So your traditional measures of productivity are fantastic. Things look great. But, within our work group, we had a lot of discussions about, is this post-pandemic phenomena, as we're coming out, booming economy, is that masking a lot of issues, right? Are those traditional productivity measures just masking issues? Do we remember how to get in front of a customer and actually sell face to face?
Yeah.
Right? Things along that nature. So we decided that, it was really important for us to take a look and delve into that topic a little bit about what does employee productivity really mean and how do you truly measure it?
Yeah. And then also from a work from home, I'd imagine you have to be sensitive to the workers not feeling like it's Big Brother kind of staring through the computer at them, right? And during when they're on and everything. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of tools to measure productivity, right? I mean, companies through various IT tools can measure how many meetings you participate in, how many phone calls you're answering, how many emails you're sending in a day. But none of those are popular with an employee. Nobody likes to feel like they're being monitored that way. So, it comes down to, again, a little bit of a level of trust within your employee base, right? Do we trust that our employees are able and capable of measuring their own output? Mm-hmm. Are they able to adjust since our work environments have changed so dramatically and our schedules have changed dramatically? Is an employee able to measure their own output? Are they getting their jobs done? And then even definitions of like what is expected from this role. In a lot of ways, those things have changed. Just go back to that traditional salesperson example. You can't measure productivity in number of face-to-face sales calls in a day, right? That no longer works in this day and age. So we tried to make some recommendations and put some logic behind how you can address those topics.
Yeah.
It's almost like living through the transition of the new norm. You know, we all talked about that way back at the beginning of this in the lockdown, but it's like everybody's living through that transition now, and
Mhm.
listening is a huge part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the related issues is the classic kind of performance review process that all companies go through, right? That's going to have to be rethought, and that will be challenged in the new environment.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
how are people going to do that? So, Don, you touch on a good issue, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with this too. After this is the managers, right? The supervisor who have to work with the people. They have to develop that trust. They have to still make sure the work gets done, but that they're checking in with the people. So, what is your opinion? Having done the report, having talked to the companies, Russ, any advice that you give to managers on who have to handle these issues on how to do that, or any new skills or training that might be required?
Yeah, great question. I think it kind of, all these things, again, as we said earlier, they're intertwined, right? Whether an employee wants to, whether they're feeling the company culture, and right, they're feeling like they're a valuable team member, and do they like their jobs, and are they performing well? Generally speaking, an employee who is happy with the company, who is happy with their job, who feels like they're being productive, they'll usually perform better, right? And a lot of that is how they're being treated, and do they feel that they have some say or control over their work environment? Just that old adage, like a happy employee is a productive one. So managers have to kind of keep in mind just where their employees' state of mind is, right? And trust that a happy employee is going to be a productive one.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's really critical, and I think even managers have to have this skill for themselves, as well as be able to make sure it's instilled in their employees, is that you need to be able to become self-sufficient and monitor your own levels of output. Am I being as productive as I know I should be? Am I being productive as I know I can be, right? A lot of employees want to carry their share of the load for the company, for their team members. I mean, so if you can instill that company culture and a sense of pride, you're generally going to have a pretty good outcome with your employee productivity.
I'm also reminded though of the adage that, employees don't leave companies, they generally leave bad managers, right?
Yeah.
When you do exit, it ultimately comes down to, I would have stayed, loved the company, but couldn't work for Eric, right? He was a son, whatever. So that's what I mean. So it'll be curious to see how that evolves too, when we see the skills necessary to be real true leaders of people in this new that we're in. So
but communication is always key. We can't stress that enough. Setting realistic expectations, instilling that culture of kind of trust and expectation within the employee base is really kind of critical to success.
Yeah, and I think Russ said something earlier with the word connection. And the managers need to connect with their employees and realize that they're connecting in a different way now. And let the change happen, and make sure the connection is effective.
Yeah, good point.
It's not the same old way. You can't manage the same old way.
Now, I'm assuming that your work group is going to continue its work in this particular area ongoing. It's because obviously we're still dealing with the next wave, and the latest,
Yeah, absolutely. The group is committed. We checked at the end of the year and said, hey, do you still see value in participating? Is there meat on the bone? Is there topics to discuss? And to a person, everyone agreed that yes, this is valuable for our organizations, and we think we can provide something of value to the industry as a whole. So we've continued to plan on meeting every month and discuss these topics. As Don mentioned, we have a really nice representative group and a lot of different viewpoints and voices in here. So we will continue to kind of have these discussions, keep our notes, and we're looking to publish something again later this year, whether it's summer or early summer or late summer, we'll see. But we think that we're probably in a little different phase of the pandemic, post-pandemic now than we were even late fall, early winter of 2021.
I do have to admit, though, when I talked Russ into leading this work group, it was only going to be a 6-month project. And it's now in its 3rd year, so I have to be careful with Russ a little bit here.
Well, no, and listen, I'm glad to hear that it's going to be ongoing, because I think the report that you've put out already, serves, it adds to the discussion that's ongoing, not just within your group, but within the industry as a whole. So I think this is good, and I'm going to ask Don in a moment how people can get a copy of it. But and then also that you're going to do another report out later in the year, and maybe to catch up on that, because we're all wondering what the new normal is, right? And it's evolving.
And I think a good distinction is, what we published previously and what I think we'll publish again is a document, we call it an areas for consideration, right? Since there is no, one size fits all solution here, there doesn't even seem to be, a huge consensus with a lot of the policies. Our task, what we're really hoping to accomplish is touch on all these different insights and all these different questions, and just offer some viewpoints, different opposing viewpoints from time to time on approach or opinion, and see how they go, because every organization is different. Everybody needs to make their own decisions on what works best for them. We're just trying to educate as many people as we can on all the different factors so that they can be best positioned to make the best decision.
Yeah, and to Russ's point, we very carefully didn't call the document a best practices, and we didn't call it guidelines. We called it areas for consideration.
Yeah. No, that's very good. So Don, in ending then, why don't you tell us, for those who are interested, how can they get their hands on this document?
Sure, it's very easy. Just go on to the ECIA website, and right on the home page, there'll be a box on the top left that says Issues and Practices. Just click on that. It'll take you to a page, and there'll be a list of various work groups right on that page. Look for the work group Workplace Disruption. Click on that. It'll take you right to the document.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both, because I do, my background is psychology, and so in organizational psychology specifically. So this was near and dear in reading this, and the considerations that you're putting forth, I think, are super important. And hopefully we can get an update later in the year as you do more excellent work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Don, Russ, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah.